cease to you and I the price of being naivety. It wears the mask of innocence. It masquerades as trust, as goodwill, as a desire to see the best in people. But beneath its benign exterior lies a subtle, corrosive danger. Naivety isn't innocence, it's vulnerability. Every time we assume goodwill is universal, every time we overlook warning signs because we want to believe in fairness, we open the door to exploitation. It is a quiet thief, siphoning power and control from those who unknowingly invite it. Consider the countless moments in life where trust, generosity, or compliance was met not with reciprocity, but with manipulation. A colleague who claimed loyalty yet undermined you. A friend who exploited your kindness for personal gain. Or even entire civilizations, brilliant and resourceful, undone because they assumed others played by the same rules they did. History is filled with examples, brilliant generals losing wars not because of strategy, but because of misjudged loyalty. Empires falling not to external force alone, but to betrayal from within. The lesson is stark: intelligence, talent, and moral uprightness do not inoculate against human cunning. Naivety does. At its core, being naive is not a moral flaw, it is a cognitive and emotional vulnerability. It is a failure to recognize the patterns that govern human behavior: self-interest, fear, ambition, envy, and desire. People are not always what they appear to be. Trust is not universal. Good intentions alone cannot protect you. When naivety dominates perception, respect is lost, influence evaporates, and control slips silently through your fingers. The person who consistently misreads intentions is a person constantly exposed to exploitation, their boundaries invisible and their authority unrecognized. Yet this awareness is not a call to cynicism or cruelty. Understanding the dangers of naivety is the first step toward untouchability. It is the realization that power begins internally, with perception. To stop being naive is to stop giving away your agency. It is to observe before reacting, to question before believing, and to act with intentionality rather than instinctive trust. Emotional openness, when combined with strategic awareness, becomes strength rather than liability. The stakes could not be higher. A single misjudged interaction can unravel months of progress. Years of effort can be undone by blind trust. And yet, most of us navigate life under the comforting illusion that people are fundamentally good, and that harm is always visible, obvious, or fair. The truth is far more insidious. Manipulation often hides behind familiarity, exploitation often lurks in smiles, and betrayal often masquerades as concern. The price of naivety is not immediate, it is gradual, cumulative, and devastating. To begin the journey toward untouchability, viewers are challenged to confront this truth. Every action taken in innocence carries a cost, if it is not tempered with awareness. Recognizing the mechanics of deception, manipulation, and human self-interest is not dark or immoral, it is practical. It is the essential foundation upon which the fortress of personal power is built. Those who ignore it risk giving away their influence, their dignity, and their freedom. Those who understand it begin the process of mastering themselves, and, by extension, mastering the forces that seek to control them. Naivety is not innocence. It is a vulnerability that quietly erodes power, agency, and respect. And the first step to becoming untouchable is simple awareness. Imagine walking through a room filled with hidden currents, invisible forces tugging at your mind, guiding your thoughts, shaping your reactions, and not realizing it. Every fear, every desire, every flicker of envy or irritation subtly dictates your behavior. You think you are acting freely, but in truth your emotions have already drawn the map of your decisions. Emotional awareness begins with recognition. It is the ability to notice the rise of a feeling before it drives your actions. The naive believe that feelings are harmless signals of experience, harmless, fleeting, but in reality, unacknowledged emotions are silent saboteurs. Anger may lead to rash words, envy may seed poor judgment, desire may create blind spots. Fear may force retreat at the exact moment courage is required. When you do not observe these currents, manipulation finds its easiest entry. History is littered with examples. Consider leaders who allowed ambition to cloud judgment or fear to dictate diplomacy. Decisions made in emotional reaction, rather than careful observation, led to downfall. Entire empires faltered because those in power could not separate impulse from strategy. Conversely, those who mastered awareness, those who observed their own feelings as if they were external phenomena, maintained clarity. They did not suppress emotion, they understood it, they charted it. And by doing so, they transformed chaos into strategy. Emotional awareness is not about denial, it is about distinction. It is the ability to answer the question, am I feeling this, or is this feeling acting through me? Recognizing a surge of anger in yourself allows you to pause, to respond rather than react. Noticing envy allows reflection instead of comparison. Feeling desire for approval can be acknowledged without submitting. Every emotion becomes a navigable point on a map, guiding rather than controlling. Psychological research supports this ancient wisdom. Humans are pattern seekers. We unconsciously respond to stimuli, body language, tone, social pressure, often before conscious thought arises. Awareness disrupts this automaticity. By observing internal reactions as they happen, you reclaim the space between stimulus and response. That space is power. That space is untouchability. Practical application begins with observation. Track moments when your emotions flare. Ask yourself, what triggered this? Is this my response? Or is it a reaction conditioned by someone else's manipulation? Gradually, recognition evolves into regulation. You learn to anticipate patterns in your own behavior, to predict emotional vulnerabilities before they can be exploited. The invisible currents of emotion are not obstacles, they are signals. Fear warns of risk. Desire highlights motivation. Anger signals injustice. When seen clearly, these currents guide decisions rather than dictate them. Emotional awareness transforms the unpredictable chaos of the mind into a map of human motivation, a charted landscape where manipulation has no unguarded entry points. By mastering awareness, you gain the first critical layer of untouchability. You no longer drift helplessly on currents you cannot see. You navigate them with intention, clarity, and strategy. You become the observer of yourself, the one who notices the invisible before it strikes, the one whose decisions emerge from insight rather than impulse. In this mastery lies the foundation for all further power. Cition Thu, the mind's battlefield. Emotional intelligence as defense. Every interaction begins in the mind long before it manifests in words or actions. The human brain, with all its brilliance, is also a battleground, a terrain where impulses, instincts, and emotions constantly vie for control. In this battlefield, naivety is the Achilles heel. Those who react unconsciously, driven by anger, fear, or desire, expose themselves to exploitation. Emotional intelligence, the ability to observe, understand, and regulate one's feelings, is not a luxury. It is the first and most critical form of self-defense. To be untouchable, you must first recognize that feeling an emotion and being controlled by it are not the same. The storm of fear or envy can rise within you, but it need not dictate your actions. Historical examples reveal leaders who survived chaos and intrigue not through brute force, but through mastery of their internal states. Consider the tacticians of Renaissance, courts princes, and advisors who navigated conspiracies, betrayals, and hidden agendas by maintaining composure, observing motives, and responding strategically. They understood that an uncontrolled reaction is a signal to others, an invitation to probe weaknesses and manipulate outcomes. Modern examples mirror this principle. CEOs, negotiators, and high-stakes diplomats often wield influence not by dominating conversations, but by regulating responses. A measured pause in negotiation, a calm acknowledgement of provocation, or a subtle shift in tone communicates power without aggression. Emotional intelligence allows individuals to see the invisible currents shaping behavior around them: fear, envy, desperation, and ambition all become readable patterns rather than threats. The science behind this is compelling. Behavioral psychology demonstrates that humans instinctively exploit predictable reactions. Anger triggers counter-attacks, desperation invites pressure, eagerness signals vulnerability. By consciously observing internal responses, individuals create a psychological buffer. They no longer act reflexively, they act strategically. Their composure becomes a shield, their awareness a radar, and their emotional autonomy a fortress against manipulation. But mastery of emotion is not suppression, it is choice. It is not a denial of feeling, but a command over action. The untouchable individual can feel fear, frustration, or desire, yet respond in a way that aligns with long-term objectives, not momentary impulses. This transformation converts vulnerability into strength. Where others are predictable, the emotionally intelligent are fluid, measured, and impenetrable. The audience is encouraged to practice this daily. Begin by observing reactions in small, controlled environments. Notice triggers, note impulses, and consciously choose responses. Reflect on past interactions. Where did emotions compromise judgment? Where did composure create advantage? Over time, these exercises develop an internal equilibrium that others cannot sway. Emotional intelligence also allows strategic observation of others. By reading the emotional currents around you, you anticipate attempts at manipulation, diffuse tension before it escalates, and engage influence on your terms. Every social interaction becomes a controlled engagement rather than a reactive struggle. Awareness becomes armor. Composure becomes a weapon. In the mind's battlefield, naivety is the first casualty. Awareness of your own emotions, combined with mastery over them, transforms the vulnerable into the untouchable. When you no longer react blindly, when you observe before acting, you claim the ultimate powered control over yourself. From this foundation, every boundary you set, every word you choose, and every strategic action you take is amplified. Emotional intelligence is not optional. It is survival. It is sovereignty. It is the silent force that makes you untouchable. Strategic boundaries. Protecting your mind and life. Naivety is rarely obvious. It does not always announce itself with grand gestures of folly. Often it whispers through overcommitment, unchecked trust, and blurred lines between generosity and vulnerability. The unguarded mind is an open invitation, an unintentional beacon for those who seek advantage. Boundaries are the antidote. They are invisible armor, a structure of psychological defense that separates influence from exploitation, respect from opportunism. History is filled with examples of brilliant minds undone not by enemies alone, but by their inability to enforce limits. Leaders who allowed advisors unfettered access were betrayed. Thinkers who offered unconditional trust were manipulated. In contrast, those who maintained clear boundaries between what they would tolerate and what they would not, commanded attention, created respect, and shielded themselves from unnecessary conflict. Boundaries do not isolate, they define. They clarify to the world exactly what is permissible and what is not, turning ambiguous social landscapes into territories of controlled influence. Strategic boundaries begin with recognition. You must first identify where your mental, emotional, and social energy is being drained, which interactions leave you reactive instead of composed, which relationships or situations allow others to dictate your state of mind. Awareness of these pressure points is the first step toward constructing defense. Once identified, boundaries can be articulated not as walls of rejection, but as frameworks of self-respect. Practical strategies reinforce these principles. Saying no without apology is not rudeness, it is clarity. Limiting access to time, attention, and personal space signals that you value your own resources. Refusing to engage with manipulative or draining behaviors communicates strength silently but unmistakably. The world will test these limits. People will push against them, attempting to locate weakness. Those who remain consistent teach a fundamental lesson: your mind, your energy, and your choices are not negotiable. Psychology shows why boundaries work. Human behavior naturally responds to consequences and reinforcement. When attempts at manipulation meet consistent resistance, patterns shift. Exploiters learn that their usual tactics fail, and respect quietly replaces intrusion. Boundaries become both shield and signaling device. They protect while commanding authority. Over time, the simple act of consistent limit setting shapes perception, establishing a reputation of firmness and self-possession. Modern examples reflect the timeless nature of this principle. CEOs protect their focus by limiting non-essential meetings. Influencers maintain mental energy by controlling interactions with followers. Even in personal relationships, those who enforce emotional boundaries experience deeper respect and reciprocal consideration. Autonomy is attractive because it communicates that your value is not contingent upon others' approval, and your decisions are grounded in internal authority. Establishing boundaries is not aggression, it is sovereignty. It is not rejection, it is definition. Each limit drawn is a reinforcement of self-worth, a statement that your mind and life are not open fields for exploitation. Psychological untouchability is built brick by brick through awareness, discipline, and consistent boundary enforcement. Those who learn this skill operate in the world with invisible armor. They move freely, act decisively, and preserve their influence because they have delineated the terrain in which they operate. The untrained mind reacts. The naive mind surrenders. The disciplined mind sets boundaries, and in doing so, becomes untouchable. Respect, influence, and control are not granted. They are earned and maintained through the invisible but unyielding architecture of self-protection. SCTOV's silence and observation power lies in stillness. The loudest voices are not always the strongest. Often, those who speak first speak most, or explain endlessly reveal more than they intend. Naivety is exposed in words, in haste, in the compulsion to justify, persuade, or appease. Every explanation is a doorway, every overreaction a map to vulnerability. Silence, by contrast, is invisible power. Stillness carries weight, observation is strategy. Together, they form a subtle yet formidable shield against exploitation. Throughout history, the masters of influence understood this. Political leaders who paused before responding, philosophers who listened more than they spoke, generals who observed before acting, all demonstrated that authority often emerges not from force, but from restraint. When words are measured and reactions controlled, people read composure as confidence. Others project significance onto silence, filling the gaps with respect, curiosity, and even fear. In essence, silence becomes a mirror. It reflects only what you allow others to see. Observation is inseparable from silence. To watch, to notice patterns, to discern motives without immediate interference, is to gain intelligence while remaining untouchable. The naive individual reacts, the wise individual waits, catalogues, and evaluates. The naive mind reveals itself in emotion. The disciplined mind reveals nothing until action is strategically chosen. In social interactions, this difference is stark. One person dominates by oversharing, the other by listening and letting others reveal themselves. The listener, the observer, becomes the silent authority in the room. Silence also disrupts predictability. Humans instinctively test boundaries, look for reactions, and attempt influence through provocation or persuasion. When the subject remains unmoved, unprovoked, and unhurried, the manipulator loses leverage. Predictable reactions are the currency of exploitation. Unpredictability, forged through controlled silence and deliberate observation, renders one psychologically untouchable. Naive minds hand over this leverage with their words. Strategic minds reclaim it with stillness. Consider the examples of historical and modern figures who mastered this principle. Abraham Lincoln, in debates and negotiations, often allowed opponents to speak at length, extracting insight while revealing nothing about his own intentions. Diplomats, negotiators, and leaders across eras have leveraged silence as a tool of power. Every pause, every carefully chosen statement, shaping perception and guiding outcomes. Influence grows not from the volume of words, but from their scarcity, precision, and timing. Viewers are encouraged to practice deliberate pauses, to observe before responding, and to resist the urge to explain every thought or justify every action. Every withheld judgment cultivates presence. Every attentive moment enhances strategic insight. Mental stillness becomes a form of armor. It shields from manipulation, preserves internal autonomy, and signals competence. Silence, paired with observation, transforms reactive vulnerability into proactive control. This is the turning point between naivety and mastery, where once words betrayed trust, now restraint commands respect. Where once impulsivity revealed weakness, now observation secures power. The still mind does more than avoid mistakes. It orchestrates influence, shapes perception, and cultivates untouchability. In a world where most reveal themselves in haste, the one who speaks little and sees much becomes quietly, undeniably formidable. SCTINV, reading the game, understanding social dynamics. Naivety is rarely exposed in a single moment. It is revealed slowly, through repeated missteps, failed assumptions, and misread signals. The world does not operate on fairness, it operates on patterns, incentives, and unspoken rules. Those who remain blind to these dynamics are vulnerable, not because they lack skill or intelligence, but because they fail to see the currents beneath the surface. Social environments are games of perception, influence, and subtle negotiation. To be untouchable is to understand the game before it plays you. Observation alone is not enough. One must interpret what is seen. Every interaction contains signals, micro-expressions, tone shifts, hesitation, or over-eagerness. Naive individuals either overlook these cues or misattribute them to honesty, kindness, or goodwill. Those who understand human behavior perceive not just what is said, but what is unsaid. They detect motives hidden beneath politeness, ambition masters camaraderie, and threats disguised as advice. In essence, the untouchable mind reads the invisible script that guides social interaction. History is replete with examples. Leaders who ignored subtle shifts in loyalty, misread alliances, or underestimated ambition fell quickly, often at the hands of those they assumed were allies. In contrast, rulers, negotiators, and strategists who understood the game could anticipate challenges, neutralize threats, and occupy psychological space without direct confrontation. Machiavelli himself warned that appearances are deceiving, and that power is won as much by perception as by action. Those who navigate social dynamics with clarity remain steps ahead, controlling outcomes while appearing composed, neutral, even benevolent. The modern world offers the same lessons in boardrooms, social networks, and informal hierarchies. A business meeting is a battlefield of incentives. A workplace team is a network of influence. Social circles are microcosms of negotiation. Each environment contains invisible forces who seeks dominance, who craves approval, who manipulates with charm or fear. Naive participants are often drawn into these currents unconsciously. The untouchable individual observes, maps relationships, and anticipates moves without signaling anxiety or desire for control. By remaining anchored and attentive, an influence is gained silently, without conflict. Reading the game requires a balance between perception and authenticity. Mimicking behaviors or masking one's true self for the sake of manipulation erodes credibility. The untouchable person adjusts to circumstances strategically but maintains internal integrity. This is the difference between being controlled and controlling perception. One bends to the environment, the other navigates it. Patterns are recognized, motives are anticipated, and actions are chosen deliberately. This creates a psychological advantage, a space where others' attempts to pressure, coerce, or deceive fail. Practical strategies emerge from this awareness. First, observe constantly. Notice who dominates conversations, who seeks validation, who tests limits. Second, interpret context. Consider incentives, emotional states. Third, anticipate reactions, project likely responses, and plan accordingly. Finally, act with consistency. Let presence, timing, and selective influence shape outcomes rather than reaction or impulse. By mastering these steps, the naive individual transforms into someone whose decisions, actions, and boundaries are self-determined, resistant to manipulation, and inherently respected. Understanding social dynamics is not about paranoia, it is about clarity. Every environment has rules, whether written or unspoken, and every interaction carries stakes. When the untouchable individual reads the currents beneath polite smiles and friendly gestures, they gain leverage without aggression, influence without dominance, and security without fear. The world does not exploit the person who understands the game, it adapts to their presence. By perceiving patterns, anticipating motives, and interpreting subtle signals, one becomes untouchable, not through force, but through mastery of awareness and strategic positioning. The transformation is subtle but profound, a life navigated consciously, free from the invisible chains of naivety, anchored in insight, and elevated through observation. To understand social dynamics is to occupy a space where manipulation cannot touch you, a realm reserved for those who see the game, rather than being played by it. Decisively, autonomy and self-dependency's strength lies within. Independence is the silent language of power. It is the invisible shield that signals, I do not require your validation to exist, to decide to act. Naive individuals often seek approval, crave attention, or bend to the will of others. They mistake compliance for connection and kindness for influence. The result is predictable. They are manipulated, pressured, and ultimately controlled. To be untouchable, one must cultivate autonomy not just in action, but in thought, emotion, and perception. True strength lies not in forcing others to defer, but in existing as someone whose inner life is self-sufficient. Autonomy begins with self-awareness. Those who are anchored internally make decisions based on principle, not persuasion. Their choices arise from their own understanding of what is right, strategic, or necessary, rather than from the subtle pressures of social expectation or the overt demands of others. Historical examples illuminate this truth. Leaders who relied on internal judgment rather than popular sentiment often outlasted peers who chased approval or reacted impulsively. The Stoics knew it well. Freedom from external influence is the foundation of resilience. Marcus Aurelius wrote that no one can harm the man who governs himself. Modern examples echo the same principle. Entrepreneurs, thinkers, and influencers who operate from internal sovereignty are often the most respected, precisely because they are not easily swayed. Financial independence amplifies psychological autonomy. The person who depends on others for security, whether income, status, or social leverage, is inherently constrained. Every interaction carries a hidden threat, the leverage of dependency. Those who cultivate resources, skills, and self-reliance remove this vulnerability. They are free to act deliberately, to respond rather than react, and to maintain boundaries without guilt or apology. Autonomy communicates an invisible signal: I am anchored. I am not yours to manipulate. It reshapes how others behave, not through intimidation, but through quiet, undeniable strength. Psychological self-dependency is equally crucial. When individuals seek approval or external validation, their emotions become predictable, their vulnerabilities exposed. Naive people unconsciously broadcast their desires, fears, and insecurities. The untouchable, however, internalizes judgment and draws confidence from personal principles rather than popular consensus. Emotional decisions are no longer dictated by applause, criticism, or fleeting social trends. Composure is no longer fragile, it is self-generated. This autonomy converts social influence from a contested space into a domain naturally ceded by others. Because the internally anchored do not need to fight for recognition, they command it through presence. Autonomy also reinforces strategic decision-making. Dependent minds react to external pressures, independent minds anticipate and initiate. They navigate negotiations, conflicts, and alliances from a position of inner strength. Modern workplaces, social hierarchies, and personal relationships reveal the pattern. Those who act from internal authority are seldom coerced. Their influence is subtle, yet formidable. Colleagues defer to their judgment, peers respect their limits, and competitors recognize a presence that cannot be easily bent or bribed. The journey to self-dependency is deliberate. It requires cultivating resilience, self-sufficiency, and internal validation. It demands the courage to make decisions that may disappoint, unsettle, or even isolate, knowing that true freedom is forged in the absence of external crutches. Over time, autonomy transforms perception and reality. Respect is earned without aggression. Influence emerges without manipulation, and control becomes a natural consequence of being untethered. Ultimately, the untouchable individual lives anchored in self-dependency. Strength does not shout, it radiates quietly. It is present in choices that are principled, in boundaries that are firm, in emotions that are self-governed. The world attempts to influence, to persuade, to exploit, but autonomy renders these efforts futile. To cultivate internal sovereignty is to reclaim power not through force, but through mastery of self. And once mastery is achieved, the person becomes untouchable, not because they dominate others, but because they no longer belong to anyone but themselves. Decisively, principles in action combining awareness, composure, and boundaries. Power is rarely loud. It does not announce itself. It does not argue for recognition. Real power reveals itself in moments of pressure, when emotions rise, when manipulation appears, when chaos invites reaction. And in those moments, most people expose themselves without realizing it. They react too quickly. They defend too eagerly. They explain too much. But the untouchable individual operates differently. They are not immune to emotion. They are immune to emotional control. This is where everything you have learned converges. Awareness, composure, boundaries, and autonomy are not separate skills. Alone, each offers protection. Together, they create psychological armor so complete that manipulation loses its entry point. The transformation happens when these principles stop being ideas and become instinct. Awareness is the foundation. It allows you to see what others miss. The subtle shifts in tone, the hidden motives behind compliments, the pressure disguised as urgency. A naive person experiences interactions at face value. An aware person reads the layers beneath them. They recognize when guilt is being used as leverage, when approval is being traded for compliance, when emotion is being weaponized. But awareness alone is not enough. Seeing manipulation without composure still leads to reaction, and reaction is where control is lost. Composure turns knowledge into power. When tension rises, the composed individual does not rush to restore comfort. They allow silence. They allow uncertainty. They allow others to reveal themselves. Humans instinctively respect those who remain steady under pressure because calmness signals internal certainty. In negotiations, the calm party often dictates the pace. In conflict, the calm individual quietly becomes the center of gravity. History repeatedly demonstrates this pattern. Leaders who maintained emotional discipline influenced outcomes not by force, but by psychological stability. While others argued, they listened. While others panicked, they waited. Their restraint created authority without demand, yet composure without boundaries invites exploitation. Calmness must be protected by limits. Boundaries transform internal strength into external reality. They communicate a simple but powerful message: is access to your time, energy, and emotions is conditional. When boundaries are clear and consistently enforced, people adapt their behavior, not because they are told to, but because human psychology responds to consequence and predictability. Consider professional environments. The individual who cannot say no becomes overloaded and replaceable. The one who calmly declines unreasonable demands becomes respected, not feared, not resented. Respected. Boundaries redefine relationships by establishing self respect as a non-negotiable principle. And this is where autonomy completes the framework. Autonomy removes the deepest vulnerability, dependence on approval. When decisions originate internally rather than socially, manipulation loses its leverage. Praise cannot control you. Criticism cannot destabilize you. Social pressure loses its force because your identity is not outsourced to external validation. Together, these principles create a paradoxical presence, predictable in values, unpredictable in reaction. Others know your standards, but they cannot predict how you will respond emotionally. And unpredictability in reaction eliminates manipulation, because manipulation relies on predictable emotional triggers. In business, this appears as strategic patience, refusing rush decisions despite pressure. In politics, it appears as controlled messaging, speaking only when words carry weight. In personal relationships, it appears as emotional steadiness, refusing to escalate conflict while also refusing disrespect. The untouchable individual does not dominate environments. They stabilize them, and stability attracts influence. People naturally defer to those who appear internally anchored, those who are not pulled by every emotional current. This is why mastering emotion is not abstract philosophy. It is practical power. It allows influence without aggression and respect without fear. You do not need to raise your voice when your presence communicates certainty. You do not need manipulation when clarity guides your decisions. Naivety dissolves when principles align with behavior. Awareness shows you the game. Composure keeps you steady within it. Boundaries protect your position. Autonomy ensures you cannot be moved against your will. And when these forces operate together, something profound happens. You stop reacting to the world, and the world begins adjusting to you. That is the moment psychological manipulation fails. That is the moment respect becomes natural rather than demanded. That is the moment you become untouchable. SCTIONX, the final transformation, becoming untouchable. True untouchability is not about deception. It is not about cruelty, manipulation, or the ruthless domination of others. It is a far subtler, far more profound force. It begins within. This final transformation reframes power as internal mastery, as sovereignty over one's own mind, emotions, and decisions. Those who have cultivated awareness, composure, boundaries, strategic communication, and autonomy no longer live under the sway of circumstance. They occupy a space where the pressures, expectations, and manipulations of others simply cannot penetrate. Naivety leaves a person exposed, a target for the subtle machinations of human ambition. The untouchable, however, has learned to perceive the currents beneath the surface. Emotional awareness allows one to recognize triggers before they dictate behavior. Composure transforms reactions into tools rather than liabilities, turning tension into leverage. Boundaries provide invisible armor, shielding attention, energy, and focus from those who would exploit them. Strategic communication ensures that words reinforce presence, not vulnerability. Autonomy roots the individual in internal validation, eliminating dependence on approval or recognition. These traits do not operate in isolation, they compound, forming a framework that is both resilient and adaptive. In practical terms, this transformation manifests as quiet power. In the workplace, the untouchable negotiates without aggression, their calm authority shaping outcomes more effectively than force or charm. In personal relationships, respect flows naturally toward those whose principles and boundaries are clear, whose reactions are measured, and whose presence radiates self-possession. In social contexts, subtle observation and deliberate action allow them to anticipate intentions, respond strategically, and maintain control without overt conflict. Others may try to influence, to provoke, or to manipulate, but the untouchable is no longer reactive. They act from clarity, not impulse, from principle, not fear, from strength, not need. This is the essence of internal sovereignty. Power is not granted by fear, intimidation, or superficial charisma. It is the consequence of disciplined mastery over one's own inner world. Respect, influence, and freedom are no longer things to be sought externally. They emerge naturally like the force of gravity, as a byproduct of coherence, self-possession, and unwavering principle. Historical and contemporary examples abound. Leaders, thinkers, and strategists who were untouchable did not dominate through cruelty. They commanded through presence, clarity, and internal fortitude. Their power was invisible, yet undeniable. The philosophical lesson is clear: the world cannot touch those who have already mastered themselves. Untouchability is not a mask worn to impress others. It is the solid foundation of character, the invisible architecture of a life lived with intentionality. Every thought, reaction, and decision is governed by self-awareness and self-discipline. The untouchable navigates life with calm, clarity, and control, leaving no vulnerabilities exposed, no leverage for others to exploit, and no openings for manipulation. As viewers reflect on this journey, they are invited to embrace the internal work required. To stop being naive is not merely to be cautious. It is to cultivate the mastery of mind and emotion that renders exploitation impossible. It is to become someone whose presence alone commands respect, whose decisions are untethered from the whims of others, and whose life operates according to principle rather than reaction. In this final transformation, untouchability is no longer a goal. It is a state of being, the natural outcome of disciplined, deliberate, and conscious self-mastery. Power begins inside, in calm, clarity, and control. The world cannot touch those who have already mastered themselves.